24th day of July 2022, 2023. I'm doing Durnford. Hope you're having a great night. You can call in at 709 589 4406. 4406. We got a poll for everybody tonight. Somewhere. Should Japan's despicable government and TEPCO be removed immediately from Fukushima nuclear meltdown site? And so we got 3 people and over 3 times more likes. Fukushima a fish with 180 times legal limit of radioactive cesium. So this story is showing up everywhere. Now it's in the United Kingdom, The Guardian. And what they're claiming is the fish that people are finding with radiation are the fish that got out of the Fukushima, what do you call it, a little dock, little port. They got a little tiny port. And a fish net at the end of it to stop fish in the port from getting out. And they've never checked it since they put the net there, which was, they said, in 2015. But because somebody found a few radioactive fish, then they're going to have to change the net. Apparently, fish got out of the port. You can't check fish with a Geiger counter. Well, you can, but you're not going to find it. I had 230 counts per minute on mine here on the east coast of Canada, which is catastrophic numbers, by the way. Cesium concentration, now they dropped the number from 130,000 becquerels per kilogram to 100,000 becquerels, more than 100,000 becquerels per kilogram. And you notice we've never seen him explain what a becquerel is. It's a physical atom that pulses energy every second. That's what a becquerel is, that pulse each second. And it'll do that long past this human experience. So black rockfish, you know the story by now. We've been covering it for a couple of days. They want more nets to prevent the fish from leaving the port. So they don't even have to say it. They just frame it that way. 44 fish with cesium above the greatest number of 100 becquerels per kilogram. There was rock trout at 1,200 becquerels per kilogram, and the eel at 17. All of these are cesium because in Japan reactors, they only make cesium. They run on uranium plutonium and actually make 1,000 other fission daughters. But the sanitized version is just cesium. And that's been around for almost 80 years. The high radioactivity levels found in the tested specimens led authorities believe it had escaped the nuclear plant's port. They had 220 million atoms per liter in Canada. Yeah, sustained radioactive fallout. So the new official version is nothing got out of the buildings. And what did get out is contained in tanks and the port. And the tanks have a total of 2.2 grams of tritium. And the fish in the local port so hard to have a conversation because everybody's so busy lying. Support for Japan's Kishida falls to the lowest since he took office. Sagged to 35%. That doesn't mean nothing, though. They couldn't care less. It's sag, rise, it's irrelevant. They're there to implement the policies, whichever public relation firm, is the highest bidder. We're in so much trouble, and they're still playing this game here. We're losing all the species because of this fallout. We have mass diseases and illnesses, autoimmune deficiencies and injuries. There's 1,800 diseases, but the only one they mention is cancer, and they don't see any cancer increases. The government's handling of a plan to release treated. You can't treat it because the filter is so radioactive you can never change it. You can never get near the building again within 20 minutes. From the crippled, the buildings, as I showed you, are completely destroyed. You can't call that crippled, right? And the plant doesn't even exist anymore. Into the ocean has also come in for criticism. 53% of whatever fictional poll they cooked up this time. Yahoo News is also running that story from The Guardian, where there's nothing radioactive in the ocean. The only fish were in the port, and that was from the new outlets we've never seen before, K, and outlet A, B, A and C rather. South Korea activists declare war on fake news over Fukushima Daiichi's treated water. And I was like, wow, this is exciting. What could this possibly be? Don't go getting your hopes up. Praising the International Atomic Energy Agency, the non-regulatory agency report. South Korea activists ask for information sharing as the discharge begins, and that Seoul's experts be allowed to monitor it. And Seoul is this current administration in South Korea. Their job is to lie to you. The last one was to phase out strongly nuclear. This one is to accelerate it into building plants worldwide. So this group, I'm not sure if I heard of them before off the top of my head, Mother's Unit. So they're claiming they're back in TEPCO's story and the 2.2 grams and everything else. And they're called, so America has a similar one called Mothers for Nuclear. And they work really hard at cutting everybody's throats, except for their own, of course. A civic group of South Korean activists. These are the furthest things. These are like Michael Schellenberg's environmental progress. These are not activists. These are controlled opposition. Organized rallies in Japan against fake news over the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear disease factories, power plant, treated waters. Part of its purpose sought to quell South Korea's frantic opposition to Japan's planned it sought to quell South Korea's frantic opposition to Japan's planned treated water discharge. The group considers these opposition movements to be largely unscientific unscientific. So the media done a big write-up on those, obviously, right? So the real building is to the left, and the people on the right are just a fraction of the mainstream media in North America, for instance. In 2014, that claimed obviously they're in a building that don't exist. They're pretending they're way above the wreckage, the nuclear death machine to the left. They never shown a picture of 1,000 tanks. Declaring war on fake news. Mother's unit looked into the recent Fukushima frenzy and proliferation of groundless rumors in South Korea. Groundless rumors. You know, like this is calling lunatics because they're faking being in a building that don't exist is now a rumor, and a groundless one at that. Fukushima frenzy and proliferation of groundless rumors in South Korea. Mother's unit had looked into recent Fukushima frenzy. It is believed they are primarily the product of anti-South Korean individuals, and mainly they're blaming on North Korea. Well, I believe some politicians, activists, and medias are using rumors about Fukushima for their individual, institutional, political, ideological, I can't even pronounce it, wow. That happens. Says June Oksoon during the rally. She's head. I'm so upset I can barely contain myself. I will not stand idly by while rumors surrounding the treated water mutate into another anti-Japanese machine. This is a war on fake news. June said in an interview with Japan Forward, which is just, it's 100% propaganda, Japan Forward. All they do is cover Fukushima, and it's strictly propaganda. The official story comes from there or AP. The group had criticized the delegation of politicians from the DP of Korea, South Korea. The group visited Japan early in July to protest treated water release. Theatrical stunts are not welcomed. She said, I apologize deeply for the terrible things South Korea lawmakers did in Japan. South Koreans generally do not hold bad feelings about Fukushima treated water, Chu lamented. I apologize deeply for the terrible things that the South Korea lawmakers did in Japan. But wanting to see it themselves because nobody's been allowed to see it, that's such a crime. Some critics in South Korea dubbed the Democratic Party of South Korea visited Japan an empty-handed business trip. A total of 11 legislators protested in Tokyo with banners primarily written in Korean that were presumably aimed at Japanese audience. Furthermore, they failed to meet with the Japanese lawmakers or employees at the Tokyo Electric Power Company during their stay. They didn't fail, they were refused. These were lawmakers from South Korea that were ostracized, were treated very, very systematically, rudely, and with contempt, and with bad intentions. They were there on a fact-finding mission. Nobody would talk to them. They went there in good faith. And as their head of their party, that was their responsibility. The fact that the lawmakers boarded Japan Airlines to get there met no essential figures in Tokyo. No one would meet with them. Simply recited pointless slogans at the rally suggested how unserious they were. Such a theatrical stunt is a waste of taxpayers' money. It merely provokes unwarranted anti-Japan sentiment at home. In an interview with Japan Forward, she's the regional head of Mother's Unit Division. Upholding the International Atomic Energy Agency's scientific evidence. Well, they're not even regulators. On July 19th, the Mothers Unit organizations acknowledged International Atomic Energy Agency's scientific findings. For 12 years since the incident, contaminated water has been safely stored and purified using ALPS without any major problem, they said. Our organization accepts the International Atomic Energy Agency's independent inspections of Fukushima nuclear power plant, said Ju. They've never inspected the power plant. June also argued that undermining respected international organizations like the IAEA could have potentially serious consequences. That's the cunt right there in the center. No, did I just say that? My apologies. It's the fucking bitch right there in the center is what I meant to say. It's a disgusting parasite. South Korea activists declared war on fake news. They're not activists. They're actual real-life monsters. She advocated that the scum nuclear in South Korea should be used in the equation. That's the bitch again right there in the center. Disgusting, despicable parasite. That's their job. They went to university to get a degree just to be a parasite. International experts discuss recent Fukushima Daiichi investigation results. The Nuclear Energy Agency. These are disgusting people, by the way. Why are they showing you that picture of Reactor 1? Shouldn't they be showing you Reactor 4 and Reactor 3? Well, let's screw up their propaganda machine. The NEA, Nuclear Energy Agency's Fukushima Daiichi Nuclear Power Stations, acts an information collection evaluation project. Aims to address key technical issues identified in investigations into the damaged, which is actually destroyed and long gone, multiple nuclear meltdowns. Calling them a damaged plant negates the nuclear meltdowns. And support the decommissioning activities of TEPCO, which we got a poll tonight saying that the Japanese government, suggesting Japanese government and TEPCO be removed immediately. TEPCO is not a decommissioning authority, for starters. They're a corporation, and everything they're responsible, but theoretically in a normal event, this is a nuclear meltdown. This is an event that affects every species on the entire planet. This is an event where you had to abandon communities permanently. And so they left the TEPCO just figuratively as the decision maker, so you don't blame the nuclear industry. You yell at TEPCO. You are in real trouble, and this world doesn't understand the significance of what is currently playing out. And it affects every single human, every single species, all the bacteria, all the fungus. This is the atomic plague, one of the many models of fallout. We got the documentations of the fallout to back up these types of assertions. The Neptunium-239, by the way, decays to plutonium-239. This model is based on 20 days of fallout and 21 days to the right. The plume is a continuous plume covering the entire planet. The project's Nuclear Energy Agency's third meeting gathered about 90 international experts, 90 degenerate monsters who refused to acknowledge the buildings look like that, who refused to acknowledge fallout landed anywhere, let alone in the rest of the world. So you got a lot of people making a lot of money. Their job is to cut your throat and all the species of the planet. There's not a single good person among them. They're incredibly vile, despicable. They're not shady, they're not dirty, they're not crooks, malfeasance, miscreants, or detestable, or monstrous, or atrocious, or disgraceful. They're odious, they're evil. They're mutants of the human species. They've turned against humanity. And their job is to make sure you can't have a future, and any species on the planet can't have a future. That's their job. And they call themselves FACE, F-A-C-E. They love stealing all these acronyms for these shady organizations. Their job is to stab you in the back and cut your throat and your children's throat. That's their job. Food from Fukushima. This is Forbes. And Forbes is just unbelievable disgusting. They're unbelievable, despicable public relation firms that write they're hideous monsters trying to just, no matter how you look at it. I'm talking about growing lettuce in Iwate in Fukushima Prefecture, releasing radioactive materials that polluted the nearby land area and parts of the Pacific Ocean. Think about how dishonest that statement actually is. That covered local land and a little part of the Pacific Ocean. That's Forbes. This model is based on 30 days, but when it gets to 20 days right there, it's covering the entire planet. Does that look like it's restricted to just the local land mass and parts of the Pacific? 2022, the agricultural production values recovered 90%. So last year, they had over 90% recovery in the nuclear wasteland itself for growing food, or selling it, or they never stopped growing it there actually. But for shipping it and selling it, they recovered over 90% last year. I think it's double this year. They've actually been growing food in the nuclear wasteland, surrounded by thousands of one-ton bags or millions of one-ton bags of radiation, where no one's allowed to live, within eyesight basically of the reactors for sale, and that the 14 prefectures were banned by 50 countries. I highlighted them for you in the map to the left. These are prefectures that 55 countries banned the food from for a decade. And then they just put people in those countries in the positions of authority, and then they removed those restrictions. They're completely genocidal and omnicidal industry. And you got so many generations of inbreeding. The current generation thinks nothing of poisoning everybody. It's like one great big happy day for them. And everybody is pretending that this is not happening. Living in a fantasy, except for those who watch this stuff, of course. The region is known for premium rice production. It's the biggest producer of rice in Japan. It's around 1 billion pounds a year. The majority of it is being shipped out. And for the first 10 years, the majority of it came to Canada because nobody else would let them ship it. Canada, which is one of the most pro-nuclear countries on the planet, removed all restrictions after 93 days and didn't even bother to report on it in the media. The ultimate betrayal, eh? That's the only way to describe nuclear. The region has been known for its premium rice and cucumbers, apples, etc., etc., etc. Yet farmers, mass murderers, had to fight against stigma over radioactivity to win back consumers' trust. And farmers should have been arrested on site for growing food in a nuclear wasteland. I can't wrap my mind around how this is even possible. The thorough European Union pre-export testing of food products from radioactivity have been reviewed every other year. They don't hate you at all. They just despise you. In the city of Minamasoma, which is a nuclear wasteland, it was abandoned for 8 years, and then the nuclear industry said, "The hell with it, let's lift the restrictions. If people are stupid enough and want to come back, let them come back." And just, I think it was around 7% came back who believed the propaganda. Food tourism in Fukushima, in a nuclear wasteland, surrounded by nuclear wastelands. By attracting tourists to the region, Fukushima aims to stimulate economic growth and create opportunities for mass murderers known as farmers and food producers. Support to local growers was showed by international acclaimed chef who helped destigmatize Fukushima product by serving locally grown radioactive vegetables at his highly rated restaurants. It just defies any kind of reality, don't it? Awati City, which is just 7 kilometers away from the ongoing nuclear meltdowns, is a complete nuclear wasteland. It's 100% nuclear wasteland. Nobody should ever go there, not even on the bullet train flying through. You should never be there. At the Iwaki City New Age Wonder Farm, which we've covered quite a bit over the years, a visitor center where greenhouses and cutting-edge production systems are used to grow local food, different varieties of deadly tomatoes without using land. Visitors can come pick themselves tomatoes and regain trust in foodstuff farmed. Like, you got to go to a nuclear wasteland to pick food for yourself. Calling it evil just doesn't do it justice. It doesn't come close to how insidious these creatures actually are. Fukushima mothers is a group of mothers who, rather than move their absurdly vulnerable children out of the nuclear wasteland, were so brainwashed they stayed. And because they were worried about the radiation, didn't understand their duty as a parent and as a human, they stayed there, and they decided to get Geiger counters and check food themselves in a nuclear wasteland. And so the media loved them. They're perfect propaganda machines. Fukushima mothers taking radioactive activity watchdog role into their own hand. Now, the reason they said they'd done it was because no universities would do it, no companies would do it. A non-profit in Fukushima Prefecture was measuring, they're a non-profit, they raised around $700,000. In fish and seawater, the Japanese government appears to release treated, every time I hear the word treated water, this is absurd to suggest you can treat the water. It's absurd. This is what they do with sewage plants, just treat the water, but you can't do it for nuclear. From the crippled, and as you know, right, the buildings are actually gone. So interesting to see all these different journalists use the exact same terms, right? It's like they all got a little booklet, and they're only allowed to say these particular sentences worldwide. And worldwide, this is what we're seeing. Comprising 13 members, many of whom are mothers with no prior experience. The group is driven by serious concerns over how to discharge, which has never stopped for 12 years, of radioactive water into, now they're pretending it'll happen in the future, might affect the environment and children's health. Children are in a nuclear wasteland. You never know it, though, if you go to the media, unfortunately. Regretfully. So, the whole story is so crazy. But if you're living in the nuclear wasteland, I'm pretty confused. Because where there are two, it's impossible. It's completely impossible for them not to see millions and millions of one-ton bags of radiation. To go check where they're checking the water, they got to go past millions of one-ton bags of radiation and ghost towns. There's there was 150,000 of these sites in 2014 or something, 15. In 2019, there was 105,000 of these storage sites of one-ton bags. But nothing got out, and what did get out was 2.2 grams of tritium, and all that is in the tank. Now, the bags got at least a minimum of 100,000 becquerels a kilogram of gamma. There's 1,000 kilograms in a bag. And lots of it's going to be 5 to 20 million becquerels, atomic decays per second, per kilogram. Like 100,000 is the minimum number, not the maximum number. So it's very confusing how these wonderful parents, mothers, seen this every day for years and years and years, and thinks that they can bypass the enormity of this by checking the food or the water. So unless we gather the data now, we won't know if there's any impact after the release. Well, the building never stopped releasing. The buildings are destroyed. The reactor cores and the fuel pools are actually gone. They're gone. When does that actually count? Because currently it doesn't count. The group began by measuring homegrown vegetables in a nuclear wasteland like rice and soil brought in by citizens, victims in the nuclear wasteland, concerned about the radioactive soil, brought in soil. And Lord knows there's lots of samples that exist of the soil. And we're talking 30 to 60 million one-ton bags at around 105,000 sites like this in 2019. I must have a defect or something because I'm honest. And I feel like I'm a fucking weirdo because I'm honest. It's like, well, everybody's lying. What the fuck am I doing telling the truth? So who tricked me into telling the truth? I should be telling lies like everybody else, shouldn't I? I think I must be the bad guy because I'm telling the truth. If everybody's telling a lie except for me, then I must be a bad person. That makes sense, don't it? Does that make sense? So they're the good people because they're lying, pretending they're in a building. ABC Cecilia Vega, she's currently in the White House press club for CBS and PBS. And she makes almost $1 million a year. She flies all over the world, hangs out with rock stars, and sports stars, and superstars, and she has an incredible life. And all she done was stabbed everybody in the back. That's how you find your way forward now, apparently. That's the way forward. Stab everybody in the back. Good person. Tell the truth. Bad person. The group, I might start calling my show Bad Dana. The group began by measuring homegrown vegetables, rice, and soil in a nuclear wasteland. They found some hot spots, which can you imagine how hot they actually really are? Because you can be sure the devices they're using are very, very terrible pieces of equipment. So much of the $700,000 operating budget is covered by donations. $700,000 operating budget, and they got to go out and collect the water themselves and test it themselves. And they refuse to acknowledge that this has happened, and they refuse to acknowledge there's millions of one-ton bags in abandoned communities because of radiation. They're worried about what might happen instead of what has already constantly, brutally, massively have already happened. How do you reconcile that, see? How do you measure? How do you measure? We're helping mothers by releasing the data. We want them to use the data as a basis for making informed decisions about how to raise their children in a nuclear wasteland rather than get them out of there. In 2015, they obtained water samples and fish samples twice a year to 4 times a year off the Fukushima plant. And so far it's found no tritium. Just gonna scream here in a second. They got the 30 million one-ton bags. They got to go past to check the water. You can't find any tritium. Because it's pretty easy to lose faith when you look at the nuclear industry. I know that much. And if you don't lose faith, then there's something wrong with you. Let me see if I can flush this out. This is a bit better. The problem is they're so evil. After a while, it just seems normal, right? Oh, yeah, I know. Hang on. There we go. Let's try this one, I suppose. So, if you go back to 2013, TEPCO's still struggling to keep their head above the contaminated water. And remember, the ALP system and the REVA system still wasn't working in 2014, let alone 13. The laboratory tests were showing ignored us 8.7 million becquerels of tritium because you had 2.35 billion becquerels of cesium and 750 million becquerels of other radioactive material in each liter of the contaminated water. And so you couldn't see the 8.7 million becquerels of tritium because the other singles were so strong. But let's go 70 kilometers away from the plant to Koriyama City. Elementary school in Koriyama City, which is 34 miles west of the Fukushima Daiichi plant, is using water bottles to shield the students in the classroom. So they're using water bottles in the courtyard and in the classroom. And they're stacking it up against the wall. They're filled with water and placed inside the square boxes which are stashed around the classroom. According to school, it reduced radiation levels inside the school by 1/3. Because they're measuring in microsieverts and millisieverts instead of physical atoms. If they're measuring in physical atoms, they would abandon the city immediately. I've been concerned about the high amount. Now, every house in Koriyama City is entitled to be decontaminated. And if that's the fact, and it is, then they should abandon the town. You can't decontaminate a house, by the way. So the degenerate UN Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation, their disposition of cesium only in Koriyama City, which is 341,000 people, was 162,000 atomic decays per square meter. And so these people can't find anything, and not even tritium. So who are these people then is the big question, right? And you can't send a child to a school where you have to use water bottles to try to reduce the radiation. the man-made radiation. The residents of Koriyama City are concerned about the high amounts of radioactive materials found around their town. And school lunches are tests for radiation. Parents are concerned because they are largely unable to find out where the food is originally produced, and they're in a nuclear wasteland. Because Koriyama City is outside of the so-called evacuation zone, the government has barely conducted any decontamination activities, but they're surrounded by millions of one-ton bags. It has so far found no tritium, the Fukushima organization. By introducing a new device, because they got $700,000 a year budget, almost $1 million budget a year to find nothing. It improved its detection levels from 2 becquerels to 0.2 becquerels per liter of tritium. It's the strangest. It's the strangest story. One of the strangest stories I've ever read. They've also received several interview requests from South Korea, China, Britain, and other foreign news medias about the scheduled release. Japan's neighbors are particularly concerned about the possible impact of water reaching the regional ecosystem, but it's never stopped going out. This is a German model based on 6 years, but the problem was the radiation was airborne, and it covered the whole planet in about 20 days. And I'm bad. I'm a very, very terrible person for acknowledging that. I apologize for being a terrible person. Japan's lack of transparency on Fukushima water is sparking fear in neighbors, says Japan experts. The scariest thing now is somebody calls himself an expert. These are... you can't call them serial killers because you make serial killers look like schoolyard bullies. 80% of South Koreans and 60% of Chinese are concerned about seafood from Fukushima in the future because of what they're going to release instead of what they've constantly released for 12 years. And because they're not worried about the meltdowns have done. So that's pretty impressive. That's pretty impressive. That they've got the whole planet so confused, they don't even know which way is up, the majority of people. So this is the stump of reactor 4. This is the stump of reactor 3. And this piece here is the very bottom piece that you can't see in this picture of this. This was originally a Kevlar sarcophagus around reactor 1. That's been removed now. It took 3 years to remove it. This was built off-site, but to give you some kind of context of scale, that is actually taller, the bottom piece is taller than reactor 4 and 3 on top of each other, are still not taller than that. And that is the bottom piece of 4 pieces of what the height should be. Today they failed to dispel perceptions in South Korea, China, and other neighboring countries. And Fukushima, even their own territories, have been contaminated as a result of the nuclear power plant disaster. They have failed to dispel the perception that South Korea and China and neighboring countries have been contaminated. Like, they're so evil, I have to wonder, do they know they're evil? Or is that just bred into them to be evil? Their parents were evil, and their parents were evil. You know how that works, right? And then the current generation, the entitled lot, that's their mentalities. They don't understand they're actually evil. They think that's how it's supposed to be, right? That's the idea of doing what they're doing, by the way. Radiation levels on U.S. West Coast spiked to 1 million times normal after Fukushima of cesium-137. This is very unusual to see this particular study. This is a study from France, by the way. But yet, officially, that never happened now. Everything is in the tanks, and there's only 2.2 grams of it, and the only thing that's there is only tritium. Nothing else has ever happened, according to the new official story as of this month. The Japanese government, and this is an Asian thing, you got Taiwan, South Korea, China, and Japan working together, coordinated by the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is UN, which is the military-industrial complex. There are 195 militaries. The Japanese government is determined, we lost our planet for sure now. The Japanese government is determined that the governments in neighboring countries have been using the water release as a political issue. This is a model of the Norwegian Institute of Air Research after 19 days. And so they're claiming now there is no validity to any of this. And that this is a political issue. This is not based on the actual destroyed and missing fuel pools and reactors. And that's the official story, and nobody's allowed to say anything different. No, and that includes specifically me. South Korea launches emergency radiation tests, and they're doing it to ease concern. Now, this has been going on for 12 years. So they're only doing it to ease concern of the planned release that hasn't stopped hemorrhaging into the environment for 12 years. And I mean hemorrhaging. A catastrophic amount, nonstop. Government plans to announce them when they are available. It'll take around 4 days for South Korea to get the test results. It normally takes months, he said, but don't worry. We'll have it magically in a couple of days. And just to reassure you, there's nothing to worry about. This is the fishermen in South Korea protesting the future release instead of the constant releases that's been going on for 12 years. It's quite the scam. It's quite breathtaking. So, we got a poll tonight because this is, which Japan and government and TEPCO should immediately be removed from the nuclear meltdown site. And I mean that in sincerity, that they should be removed immediately. Second trial begins over damages from Fukushima nuclear plant losses. They cemented that whole site. See all the cement walls everywhere? They used to be all grass burns, but now it's all cement. Second trial begins over damages. So they said there was no way they could have foreseen damage from a massive tsunami resulting from an earthquake. And therefore, right? The case should be thrown out. But they got a 3,000-year history of massive earthquakes and tsunamis right there. But they're the nuclear industry. And no species, and they kill all the species, doesn't matter. You're not allowed to criticize this bizarre nuclear cult on our planet. And now we're paying a brutal price. We've lost almost all the species, and the rest of them are on the short list of extinction. And the story crops up again. And the fish got out of the breakwater, is what they're saying. And that there's nothing got into the ocean. That's their official story. 2.2 grams is released from the buildings that no longer exist. They burnt continuously now for 12 years in the China syndrome. And everything that got released is in the 1,000 tanks. That's the official story now. The tanks were originally just for samples that they were pumping up from 160 wells they drilled around the site. Fukushima nuclear plant water release within weeks raises worries about setbacks to businesses. Mari Yamaguchi. And if anybody knows anything about Mari Yamaguchi, she's the cover story for over 10 years. Whenever she comes out, typically, she's going to set the story that everybody else is going to regurgitate, and that's done through the Associated Press. A highly contested plan facing fierce protest. They're artificially trying to create a protest of what might happen to drown out what has already happened. And then what might happen is what they're claiming is going to be tritium, which is the very last isotope you're worried about, instead of what has happened and continues to happen. Let me see if I can find that. So these things went China syndrome. Some of them did, right? Some of the fuel pools, some of the reactor cores, 1 and 2 have went China syndrome. From what we're looking at, Reactor 3 and Reactor 4, they detonated and ejected their inventories, their 2 fuel pools and the reactor cores directly into the environment. And they cooked up a lot of different cover stories over the years. There we go. And we've covered the majority of them.
Fukushima plants say the ground under the facility is cracking and radioactive steam is escaping through the cracks. The cooling system at the plant failed after the devastating tsunami hit Japan in March, sparking a nuclear crisis. But new evidence suggests that Fukushima reactors were doomed to cripple even before the massive wave reached them. Joining me now via broad.
Okay. So, workers say the ground under Fukushima. Now the video to the right is 40 times normal speed. The steam coming out of 6 places was 10 sieverts per hour, but that was the max that the Geiger counters could read, is 10 sieverts per hour. But in reality, in an event like this, you're talking about thousands of sieverts. The whole site disappeared. Invisible China syndrome radioactive plumes. So the plumes are coming out of the ground from where the ground is cracked from the explosions. So they can't get nuclear scientists to go there. So it's only the homeless and destitute and the victims of society and the immigrants who don't speak the language. So there's a person stood up there, two of them, and they're checking the water filtration system. That's just the official story. So the problem is you got 8 fuel pools, each up with decades of reactor cores. They blew up. So if you pour water over anything that's left, it's picking up fuel particulates itself. And you have to do it constantly. And a normal reactor needs 4,500 tons a minute. And it needs, which is 1 million gallons per minute, 1,440 minutes a day, which is enough to fill up all the tanks 6 times a day from a single reactor. When it melts down, it's no longer at 600 degrees, it's at 9,000 degrees. So it needs a lot more water. So you can fill up all the tanks 20 times a day. But the tanks were built to trick you into complacency, and it worked, obviously. And then, lo and behold, the new version over the last 3 or 4 weeks is 2.2 grams of tritium. And if you try to filter it, because you've got gammas and alphas and neutrons and betas, then you're going to cause a chain reaction in the filtration system. But the filtration system is going to be thousands of sieverts after 20 meters, because around 2.2 sieverts is just beta. If we only include only beta emitters, and there's many more, obviously, you're 2.2 sieverts per liter. So you're 1.4 million sieverts per tank. 3 sieverts is a lethal dose. So 1.4 million sieverts, the tanks need to be 12, 14 feet thick lead, and they're not. And they were built hastily. They're just bolted together. And so if you fill up a tank, you can't build another tank. If you try to filter it, the hoses, you can't step over them without getting a lethal dose. You can't walk alongside of them without getting a lethal dose. Because that's how this actually works, right? We're talking about absurd numbers. And so they cooked up constant crazy stories to cover each part of the disaster. And one of them is, the current newest version is 2.2 grams of tritium is the only thing that got out, but don't worry because it's in 8,000 tanks. Residents worried water discharge 12 years after, which has been going on for 12 years, could deal another setback to Fukushima's image. There's nobody there that talks like that. That's how they talk. That's not how people talk. They're not quoting somebody, or they would have said, Mom, Pa, Kettle lives in so-and-so land, right? And that's the stump of Reactor 3. The fuel pools would have been at the top of the buildings and reactor cores. Same thing for Reactor 4. This planet is in so much trouble. I can't wrap my mind around it, why the world is not fighting back. I just can't wrap my mind around it. And so the media is quoting them that without a healthy ocean, can't make a living. So the media is aware of what the lies are going to do. It's not you can't make a living, you can't have a planet. No, the ocean is your lifeblood. It's the very blood of the planet. And we've destroyed both oceans, the major oceans, the Atlantic and the Pacific, for instance. We know now have been devastated by this through the research expeditions that we've carried out. And we've suffered dramatically over the last number of years, but we still managed to get research in and different variations on land and the ocean. Thank goodness we were doing the land research. That was probably one of the most important things we've done in the last 5 years, was take it to the interior. We suffered with endless setbacks, endless breakdowns, endless issues. And I mean that every way possible. It's been endless, a barrage of problems, including my health, unfortunately, right? And I'm struggling to fight for the planet. Officials say the impact would be limited to rumors. So evil just to say something like that. It's just such an evil statement. I actually done research expeditions year after year after year after year, and I'm showing an extinction event. Not almost an extinction event, I'm showing an extinction event. The species to your left are actually exterminated. Fukushima and the nuclear industry has exterminated them. Fukushima was a vicious pulse event. He said, if you ask me what I think about the water release, I'm against it. The water's collected, filtered, and stored in 1,000 tanks. And this is a garbage can statement where they just recycle it over and over and over, but there's no validity to it again. He said an accidental leak would be the ultimate strikeout. It will cause actual damage, not reputational. An actual leak. So if that actually happened, that would be catastrophic, is what they're saying. And we've heard so many similar I'm embarrassed to be on this planet. I understand, though, how brainwashing works, but I just didn't dream it could get to this level. It's a whole different level of scumbags. You gotta be an absurd scumbag to do what they're doing. He said it's eerie to add, it's to live near the damaged. These are not damaged, they're completely destroyed plants for decades. His wife evacuated her to her parents' home near Tokyo with their 4 children. He stayed in the nuclear wasteland, Iwaki, to work at reopening his fish store. Sometimes you wonder if they're making this up because it's so evil. But it's probably true. Japanese fishing organizations oppose the water release as they worry about the damage to reputation. So they're not worried about the water, they're worried about the damage to the reputation. We've been listening to this really strongly for the last year or so, this version. And scientists, and they don't name one as usual, they don't name the fishermen, they don't name the people in the communities, they don't name this, they don't name that. They just say that, right? Scientists generally agree the environmental impact from treated water would be negligible. University of Tokyo environmental chemistry professor Katsumi Shujugawa. Now, there's not a lot of professors on the planet when you look at the big scope of things, right? And they got no problem. Every one of them that we come across cut your throat. I have got blown back from other professors over the years for using that statement, but those people that clapped back at me, I didn't see them speaking out. Hang on, we're almost there. I think. So, because there's not a lot of professors on the planet, I found it really interesting how many professors were convicted of vicious crimes. UVA professor convicted of assault and battery. Left-wing professor convicted of raping a 13-month-old baby. When research becomes rape. NIU professor convicted of DUI for the third time. Professor convicted of falsifying assets. Convicted of attempted theft by swindle. Sex crimes, a professor convicted of sex crimes can work in Hong Kong. Ex-Ivy League professor convicted in wife's death is freed. Professor convicted of exposing himself to multiple women. Professor convicted of poisoning wife. Professor convicted of fraud of $700,000 NASA contract. Professor convicted of spying. Retired professor convicted of arms export violation. Harvard school professor convicted of abuse. Professor convicted of sharing technology. Child porn case professors. Indian American professor convicted of defrauding the students. XMI professor convicted of staging his own death. Former Harvard professor convicted of stealing over $500,000 from a Hong Kong jewelry magnate. Former Florida State professor convicted of embezzlement. Riverside professor convicted of torturing wife faces life in prison. Law professor convicted of sex for grades. Law professor. Have sex with him and he'll give you good grades. Law professor. A law professor. Grand fraud. Convicted of defrauding National Science Foundation. Professors convicted of first-degree murder. Kansas State professor. Professor convicted of faking vandalism. Jewish professor convicted of marketing child porn. Professor says 4 years in prison for arms violation. Professor convicted of vehicular manslaughter. Professor convicted of scrawling polite graffiti on people's cars with a screwdriver. Convicted of child pornography charges, professors. Yoga ball murders where he murdered his wife and daughter, I believe it was, by putting cyanide in their yoga balls. Morgan State University professor convicted of fraud and convicted former professor of midst abusing children from a native community, I believe it was. Pittsburgh professor convicted of wife's cyanide death. Another professor convicted of embezzling $650,000 from students' fund. MIT professor convicted of staging shooting. And the list goes on. It seems to go on forever, ever. All the major universities. And so we constantly see, when we see a professor in a story, it's so they can stab you in the back and lie to you. That's what we're seeing, right? So you have all of these professors that are convicted, and then we have all the other professors that should be convicted. That's the right way, unfortunately, that you have to look at a professor. That's the only way that you can actually be honest when you're thinking about a professor. You have to consider them as the most dangerous creatures on the planet. And I mean, you know, we don't call nuclear schools schools of mass destruction for nothing, right? Libby Halevi, nuclear hot seat, who attacked me years ago, had Felipe Carrillo, who made a 52-minute film that busts the myths of nuclear safety. Now, he actually came up to Powell River, got a hotel room, brought his camera, the same one that he's using here, and done a documentary on me. And he contacted me. He was ready to go ahead with the same documentaries he's doing right there. And he told me it would be me, Arnie Gunnarsson, and Helen Caldecott. And I said, well, I don't want to be in your documentary. And so this one is with Helen Caldecott and Arnie Gunnarsson. And Yoshi Sumatsu, who I've done a radio show with for 2 years, every Sunday. He was a former forensic investigative journalist for the Japan Times. And he would do the Sunday special edition, very prestigious position. He's retired. He said, I got Nobel Prize nominee Dr. Helen Caldecott and nuclear engineer Arnie Gunnarsson. And then the former spokesperson for the nuclear industry, Megat Gunnarsson. So I'm going to play a clip of Helen Caldecott and Arnie Gunnarsson, and so you can understand why I would not do a documentary with those people. Being evil comes natural to some people, and let's play 2 clips of Helen Caldecott. There's one. That'll be the second one. Then the next one is Arnie Gunnarsson.
And especially building 3 is very fragile. It's still got a huge cooling pool on its roof, protected by nothing. The molten core has melted its way down onto the concrete of the containment vessel, but maybe into the earth. And if that collapsed, there would be a nuclear inferno.
So if that collapsed, and look at it, does anybody think it didn't collapse? Saying that it melted down into the building and is sitting on a piece of cement, when it's clearly ejected from the building. She's done this interview hundreds of times. She was asked, is the building to the right the real building of Reactor 4 or the one to the left?
Let me ask you this. You've said that if the spent fuel pool in number 4 collapses, that you would evacuate your family from Boston. Do you think we would ever know the truth of what's going on there? And the reason I ask is because we've seen coverage in the national news media here in the United States from ABC News and others that take video cameras in, saying that they're being given exclusive access to number 4 in the removal of the fuel rods, which is said to have begun. And what we see in the video being shared here in America is a pristine interior building. It doesn't look like a building in which the top blew off in a hydrogen explosion.
The Japanese are very tidy people, and they have, by robot control and by human beings, removed the debris from the top of Building 4, and it does look pristine.
But it doesn't. Arnie Gunnarsson, I put his video, Fear Winds, in the fuel pool of Reactor 4. This is the original picture of Reactor 4. And he's going to claim that they went into the fuel pool of Reactor 4. Now, when he was saying that, it looked like the building to the left. And the fuel pools are the red depictions at the top. There's 2 fuel pools with decades of reactor cores. The building actually doesn't even exist. Now, Arnie made the assemblies, or the racks for the assemblies, which each has 100 fuel rods. Each assembly is 100 fuel rods. And they sit in racks in the fuel pools where they're splitting atoms into the environment.
The Unit 4 was damaged twice. It was damaged by all of the earthquakes that occurred, and it was also damaged by a series of explosions over the first week or two of the accident. So the building is structurally weakened. Now, Tokyo Electric's acknowledged that. They went in May and June of last year. This is more than a year ago, and put an enormous number of extra structural supports directly under the fuel pool to keep the bottom of the pool from breaking through.
So you can't go in a building that don't exist. That's just how the laws of physics actually work. The building doesn't exist, right? But that's who he interviewed. That's the same camera he bought up in, I think it's 2017, and done an interview with me in Powell River when I was getting ready to take off on a research expedition. He wasn't the only one that done that. And so they put Yoshi Shimatsu in there to give him some credibilities, or to destroy his credibility, maybe. He mentions Canada, but he doesn't mention me, obviously. I couldn't care less. I'm not going to be put in. I don't want to be put in any videos with Arnie Gunnarsson and Helen Callicott. They're monsters. Osaka protesters denounce restart of 1970 reactor. This has been closed down since 2011, before Fukushima. It's around 380 protesters. It's a 50-year-old plant. So Oppenheimer, this is a movie. It's totally fictional. And it's meant to give the nuclear industry a boost, not warn you. And it's supposed to be just a movie, but it's actually meant to boost the nuclear industry. So it's not a movie, it's propaganda, right? And I disrespect people that do that. And I've had Hollywood call me up and talk for hours to me. And they're not naive. They asked all the right questions, and they fed off the answers appropriately. Anyway, I'm burnt out. I had a long day. Tough day. Okay, so don't forget to give us a thumbs up if you made it this far. We'll close off the poll. An amazing 33 votes on an extinction level event. Should Japan's despicable government, disgusting, horrific, coward government, and monstrous TEPCO be removed immediately from the Fukushima nuclear meltdown site? And that's affirmative 100%, yes. I appreciate everybody that participated in the poll. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. Stephen Young donated 50 yesterday. Thank you, Stephen. I hope you're feeling a bit better tonight. I know you're probably not. He's got 3 years in now recovering from a debilitating event in his life. Still full of spirit, though. I was talking to him last week. His voice sounds a lot better. It's not the same, Stephen, but it definitely sounds a lot better than the last number of years. So she has to drive past millions of one-ton bags she's been looking at for 12 years. All these ghost towns. None of that exists. And not only that, they got $700,000 a year. And they got a $5 jerry can and a $2 piece of plastic to get the water to the ocean with. And I'm looking right in the face of an extinction event we're onto. And the last 12 years of research is clear. The whole planet is turned against us. The whole medias and universities and governments have worked full time for 12 years to stab everybody in the back every step of the way. It's heartbreaking. It's terrifying, really, isn't it? You don't have any media, any universities or government agencies to turn to. Not one. They've all been captured by the industry and they're actively exterminating you. Have a great night. Great day tomorrow. Hugs for you and your loved ones, your friends, and your families, and your pets. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. These incredibly exciting shows.